I'm going to continue to read a little bit about what Will Bonsalls writes about acorns in his book, Will Bonsalls' Essential Guide to Radical Self-Reliant Gardening. Acorns have every bit as much potential for stable food production, but they have their own hurdles to surmount. There are no blights or other disease problems to contend with, as far as I know, but as with chestnuts, squirrels are to be reckoned with. Fortunately for us, the oak tree itself has evolved a strategy for coping with this. In natural oak groves, if the trees all bore heavy crops of acorns consistently, the squirrel population would simply expand to equal the supply, and the oaks would be hard put to fulfill their own imperative, propagating themselves. Instead, they restrict their nut production to a certain modest level, which supports a squirrel population of some size, but in effect holds down the rodents' numbers. Then every so often the oaks have what is called a mast year, when they produce so many acorns that the squirrel population can't begin to consume them all. In fact, the squirrels will hide more acorns than they can possibly remember to find, and many of those will sprout to become more oak trees, which is the main idea, though don't try to tell squirrels that. What an elegant strategy, devised not by any one oak tree nor even the oaks as a species, but rather by a whole forest community, including even the squirrels who play an unwitting role in their own self-discipline. Isn't life marvelous? I do have to wonder, if humans got involved in this, say by breeding oaks with consistently abundant yearly crops, would we thereby sacrifice this natural strategy for outwitting the acorn predators? I'm not suggesting that such breeding would not be a good idea, just that we would then have to deal with the squirrel problem ourselves. In my state, we have 3 major species of oak: red, white, and burr. Only the red oak is endemic to my particular area, but the other 2 are perfectly hardy and easily introduced. I have a grove of Burr Oaks and have harvested a few nuts from them. The Burr Oak is the lowest in tannin, the red oak is the highest. However, my friends Chris and Ashira Knapp, who consume literally bushels of acorns every year, say the reds are bigger and easiest to separate, and Chris considers the reds to be less bland tasting once you remove the tannin. He has much more experience with acorns than I have, so I defer to his opinion. On the other hand, if the Burr Oaks and whites require much less leaching, might their nutritional value be higher? I don't know. Chris and Ashira do know a good deal about acorn nutrition, however, as behooves anyone who makes any item such an important part of his diet. At considerable expense, they have had a sample of their acorn flour lab tested, and the results seem to confirm their high opinion of acorns' adequacy to nourish humans. Their acorn meal, processed by their method, contained 55% carbohydrate, mostly starch, no sugar, 26% fat, and 7.5% protein. Not too shabby, I say. It would have been interesting to know the B vitamin content, as those are more water soluble and could be adversely affected by the long leaching. By all means, plant oats on your land, but not for yourself, rather for your children's children. Then raise your kids to appreciate such great natural tastes, as Chris and Ashira have, so that someday they will value this easy-gotten bounty. Meanwhile, scout around your area and find some old bearing trees that you can share with the squirrels. Don't be afraid that you'll leave none for them. They'll see to that. Keep an eye on your oak trees. If you notice when they first begin dropping acorns, you get to keep your share from the squirrels. Not that you want to start collecting the very first ones, it's probably not worth it, but as they begin to litter the ground in quantity, you should be aware of it and act accordingly. Prompt collecting gets you ahead of the squirrels and also leaves you with fewer moldy nuts to cull out. Some years there may be wormholes, perhaps from a curculio in some of the shells. It's good to pick those anyway and burn them. You'll knock down the pest cycle for future years, especially if these are trees you intend to return to each year. Chris treats his acorns like I do my hazels. He spreads them out on racks away from rodents to dry for several days. Unlike hazels, there are no outer husks to thresh and winnow away, so the thoroughly dried acorns can be simply stored away in squirrel-proof barrels in a cool place until we're ready to continue processing. Chris does his in large batches throughout the year as his family uses them. When I helped him do a batch, we ran a bucket of dried nuts through his hand-cranked Dave Belt cracker. Very quick, very effective, and only a few nut meat halves stayed stuck in their shells. By dumping in a bucket of cold water, we quickly floated off the shells and most of the papery inner linings. After re-drying the kernels and picking them up over for any defects or debris, we ground them in his Corona mill. At this stage, the meal is a beautiful tawny color and smells like pecans, but it is still completely inedible, trust me. Next, we mix the meal with enough cold water to make a thin batter or slurry. This we poured onto a screen drying rack lined with pre-filter material used by the maple syrup industry. I assume any fine cloth-like sheeting would work well. As the water drained out of the slurry, we placed a piece of the same material on top of it and set the tray under a faucet open to a slow trickle. The material spreads the water out so it seeps through everywhere, instead of just washing out a hole under the faucet. Left like that for 12 to 24 hours, depending on how cold the water is, the acorn cake will become thoroughly tannin-free and pleasant tasting. Chris and I had a discussion over the relatives merits of ice cold and tepid water. It seems to me that the longer, colder leach would have less risk of losing water-soluble vitamins and minerals, whereas Chris wondered if the shorter processing time might compensate for the slightly warmer temperature. The only way we can ever resolve the question is by more lab tests. It is hardly a trivial question for someone who makes acorns a very significant portion of his diet. After leaching, the drained meal is spread out on other drying racks, no more than 1/4 inch or 0.6 centimeters deep, cloth lined to keep the meal from sifting through as it dries. When the meal is half dry, Chris breaks it up into a lumpy mass, which greatly accelerates further drying. Then it can be stored until use. If the original grinding was on the coarse side, the meal can now be reground for any use requiring a finer texture. Some sources caution against storing acorn meal for too long, as its relatively high fat content compare with, say, wheat, but low next to most other nuts, make it prone to rancidity. For Chris, that is no problem. What he processes in a single batch will easily be consumed by his family in 2 to 3 weeks. Now, his family members are not die-hard wild food enthusiasts who will eat anything as long as it's good for them. His kids know what they like and what they don't. And they like acorn dishes. These include acorn cakes, little unleavened burger-like things that are 2/3 acorn meal and only 1/3 oat flour, no wheat, which are richly delicious, and acorn porridge that may be combined with cornmeal or other things.